So today we're talking about Rand Paul's speech on the Senate floor where he ripped the Ukraine funding bill. Now, I'm not necessarily against giving Ukraine money, but at the same time, we have a lot of domestic problems back home, and we never seem to have money for that. I mean, he makes a good point this bill is Ukraine first, not America first, but Rand Paul's ideology doesn't actually support actual helping of Americans domestically anyways, so it's really strange for him to even make this point. But I just wanted to give my 2 cents on his speech on what I agreed with and a lot of things I definitely disagree with.
We won't let you do it unless you secure the border. So that's how the debate sort of began. And a lot of people say, why don't Republicans stand up more? See, in the Senate, the unusual and really creative thing that our founding fathers did was in the Senate, they didn't make it a majority rule. It's a supermajority rule. So if you ever have 41 votes in the Senate, you can block anything the majority wants to do. So we have 49 Republicans. That means we have the power of 41.
I mean, Rand Paul is correct here because the founding fathers didn't want us to have political tensions boil over. So they made it a supermajority. That way that things could be slowed down. You just don't pass legislation carelessly. This has actually been something people complain about, like about the filibuster, and they hate the filibuster. The filibuster's there to protect things from getting passed that you don't actually want to get passed in the long run because people have longer times to actually think about the bill. The problem is nowadays people don't actually get up there and filibuster because back then you had to get up there with a phone book and speak endlessly on any legislation you were supporting or you were against. And they've gotten lazy nowadays because they no longer have to do this. And the reason they don't have to do this is because they changed the law back in the 1970s. And now they no longer actually have to filibuster anything. They can just be like, well, I filibuster. Well, that's not how it was actually envisioned either.
If we had interested leadership that wanted to use the strength of our 41, that wanted to use the strength of the minority to say, we will only let them shovel the money and flush it down the toilet and throw it away and give it to other countries. We will only let that happen if you secure the border. We had the leverage. What ended up happening is we ended up getting what I would call is fake reform. It was reform negotiated, and the mistake was doing it, I think, behind closed doors and with only one individual. Not that it's really all that individual's fault, but the individual really needed to come back to the caucus and say, do you guys think you might, you men and women, do you think you might?
He has a decent point here that Senator Langford was the main negotiator with the Democrats in order to drill up the new border reform bill. But the problem is he's a very conservative Republican who knows what the Republican minority wants. And he got them most of what they wanted. So I disagree with him here. Maybe they just disagree with him on procedural grounds. Like, hey, maybe you should go back and forth and actually negotiate the rest of us and see if you can get a better deal. But I'm telling you right now, if Donald Trump becomes president, he's not going to get a more secure border deal than they got offered by the Democrats right now. Because if it comes up again under Trump, they're going to have some sort of amnesty in there, some sort of pathway to citizenship. And they'll probably have leverage by then because I think Ukraine support will pass probably somewhere in April. So they're no longer going to have that as a bargaining chip. So they're going to have to come to the table with Trump and actually negotiate some either amnesty or pathway to citizenship. So Rand Paul is complaining about a bill that was written in the dark, and I agree with that, but these are the policies you claim to support as far as like actually securing the border. So I disagree with him here. I think he's just more arguing on procedural grounds, and he really, really doesn't want Ukraine aid.
I'd support this border bill we're putting together. Instead, it was just sort of all done deal. Here it is. And then almost all of us said it's not adequate. Almost all of us said it's actually worse than the existing law. And so we were stuck in a conundrum, and then our leadership abdicated. They basically just punted. Our leadership said, we're not going to use the power.
This is what I don't like about current Republicans, because they won't say just Donald Trump. It really is Voldemort, he who shall not be named, because they want his voters. Because the border bill was tanked because of Donald Trump. It's very easy to see that. There was actually stories by reporters of people who actually wanted this legislation passed, who were Republican, were literally screaming at each other, cussing each other out because this border bill is actually probably the best thing that they ever wanted, and they didn't get it because of partisan politics and Donald Trump.
Or the minority, because we want and salivate to send the money to Ukraine also. This is the problem now. And in our country, some people will say there needs to be more compromise. Here's compromise, you've got it. You got 10 or 15 Republicans who side with the Democrats. They believe in Ukraine first and America last. They believe that we should borrow $100 billion, whether it comes from China or whether the Federal Reserve prints it up. We're going to take $100 billion and send it over there, on top of the $113 billion we've already sent.
This is what I love about Rand Paul, and there's some things I hate about Rand Paul. He's very consistent when it comes to being against military spending abroad, but For him to use the argument that, oh, I want to put Americans first, I mean, you don't ever want to actually vote on legislation that might help Americans domestically. You're completely against that. So is his father. He's at least consistent in his ideology, but I have a little bit of a problem with him saying, we need to put Ukraine first instead of Americans first. Well, you wouldn't support any legislation that would actually help Americans domestically. So let's not pretend that you all of a sudden are for programs or social programs that would help the poor. You're just not.
And some might say, well, it's for a good cause. Well, shouldn't we examine what they're going to spend it on? Shouldn't we have like a special inspector general, someone who's trained to look for waste? Shouldn't we have that person appointed to look at the waste? I've advocated it for over a year. I forced them to vote on it. The Democrats all voted no, and all the big government Republicans who love this money, they voted no too. They don't want scrutiny of how the money's being spent. I even helped them to pick who would be the inspector general. Somebody who's been doing it for 10 years. The Inspector General that's in charge of Afghanistan is called SIGAR, Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. And he's done a great job. He's got a team of over 100 people that work for him, accountants and economists and people who look at this war spending.
Isn't this a little crazy? He actually has a good idea here. We should actually have someone take a look at this spending and make sure we're not wasting anything. But both Democrats and Republicans vote against it because they're for just wasting money in war. And it's just flabbergasting to me that people are like, oh, well, maybe we should appoint someone who can actually keep track of this spending and actually keep account of it. But both the Democrats and the Republicans are against it, which blows my mind because it's just like, hey, we have to keep finances in our own houses and stuff, but apparently not for Congress. Just spend all the money you want and just throw it down the toilet.
They know how to look at war spending. They know how to look at war contracts. They know how to look for malfeasance. And he's found billions of dollars worth of it. Now, we spent a couple trillion in Afghanistan. That's not the Inspector General's fault. That's Congress's fault. But he's done his best to try to police this. He's written entire books on the waste. And as a consequence, the people who love sending your money overseas, they hate him. They hate the idea. They hate the idea so much that they've voted it down with a vast majority. They don't want an Inspector General. But if you ask them, well, if you don't want to oversee the money, they would say, oh, no, the Pentagon or the State Department or somebody already has an Inspector General. They'll do it. And I said, oh, you mean the Pentagon that can't be audited? The Pentagon that refuses to be audited? The Pentagon says they're too big to be audited?
Isn't it kind of crazy the Pentagon hasn't passed 5 audits in a row, and now they're telling us maybe 2 or 3 years down the line they might pass an audit? I don't really know how any other organization could get away with that. But when it comes to defense spending, they just throw money into it and hope for the best, and hopefully they spend their money the right way, when no other business or no other organization works this way.
Trust them to now oversee the money going to Ukraine? When Ukraine has a history of being in the bottom 10% as far as corruption, meaning they have had more corruption than the other 90% of countries, I think that's kind of crazy. Even if you were for the money, you would think that the power of 41 supposedly conservative Republicans could simply look them in the eye and say, we're giving you the money, but we want this, this, and this. They have the power to do it. They completely abdicated their power. They threw in the towel and said, we're not going to do anything on the border, but we're not going to even ask for an Inspector General on this. We're just fine. Shovel it out the door. So where's some of the money going? Inevitably, some of it's buying weapons. And to listen to the supporters of this bill, they are proud of the weapons and the profit that will go to the people who sell weapons. This to me just boggles the mind. They actually have a new name. They now call it the Defense Industrial Base. Since the time of Eisenhower, it was known as the Military Industrial Complex. But they've renamed it the Defense Industrial Base, and we're going to rebuild ours with war profits from Ukraine. See, we're really not giving it to Ukraine. We're giving it to Ukraine. They're giving it right back to American arms manufacturers. See, it's just...
There is some logic behind this because technically we can give them all the old weapons and the stuff that actually needs to be used before it expires for them to use against Russia so that we can build new weapons for us. That's kind of the deal. We're giving them, picture like you had an old iPhone and you don't like it anymore and you were like, well, I'm going to go get a new iPhone, but the other person, Ukraine, needs an iPhone. You just give them your iPhone and then you get to get the new iPhone. That's the logic behind it, even though military spending doesn't lead to economic prosperity.
Sort of mercantile, oh yeah, it looks like it's good for business, it's good for money. And it's like, are these people not realizing we're talking about war? A war that some estimate 500,000 people have died? And they're thinking, well, gosh, if instead of 100,000 rifles, we send them 1 million, that'll be more profit, and our companies will be bigger and more profitable and able to make more weapons for us then. not really acknowledging that 1,000,000 rifles might kill more people than 100,000. Or let's say we have 1,000 tanks. Well, what if we give them 10,000 tanks? There'll be more profit for the arms merchants. Wouldn't that be good? That'll be great. We're reinvigorating the defense industrial base.
I have a degree in economics, so there was something called the broken window fallacy, meaning that say for instance I hired a kid to basically take bricks and throw them through windows and break windows. If destruction actually created profits, then that person throwing the brick through the window just created a job, because you had to have someone come and actually make the glass, and then you had to have someone install the new window. If destroying things actually worked, then we should just hire a bunch of kids to throw bricks through windows, because they would be creating jobs. This is also known as taking account of what is seen and what is not seen. What is seen is a window, and what is not seen, you could have done with that money in order to fix the window to actually use it on something else that actually grows the economy. So just building bombs and destroying things for war does not lead to economic prosperity. If that were true, then we should just hire a bunch of kids with bricks and throw them through windows.
Really? You're going to make the argument that war is good? Or maybe war ain't so bad? Or maybe just a little war here and there if we can get some more profit for these guys, the big companies, the large multinational arms manufacturers, if they could just get a little more profit. A little more profit would be good, because that'll reinforce the defense industrial base. This is saying the quiet part out loud. This is saying something they should be embarrassed by. This is saying something so reprehensible and so disgusting. But it's happened from the leadership on our side, the leadership on the other side. It's happened also with the Biden administration. In committee, they come to us and they brag about how this isn't really money to Ukraine, this is money to America. We're giving it to Ukraine, but it's sort of a conduit. It's sort of a laundering scheme to get the money back to America, our arms manufacturers. So under this logic, the longer the war goes on, the more weapons we sell, the better it is for our defense industrial base. So a one-year war, well, let's say we're close to, I think, 2 years. A 2-year war that's lost 500,000 people, which would be better for the defense industrial base? A 2-year war that loses 500,000 people, or a 3-year war that loses 750,000 people?
Overall, I think he makes some decent points here. We should have accountability with the money going overseas with Ukraine, because it is one of the world's most corrupt economies before they were invaded by Russia, and then we manufactured that it's a Goldilocks situation. They were completely innocent. As far as Ukraine funding goes, I'm not necessarily against Ukraine, because they are protecting themselves from an aggressive nation trying to take them over. At the same time, the United States making this argument is kind of hypocritical, because we went into Iraq that did nothing to us, overthrew its government, and then same thing with Afghanistan. We went after them because we were attacked from there, but then we tried to nation build, and then we spent 20 years there, wasted a bunch of money, and then it got taken over by the Taliban anyways, and we left a bunch of weapons for them to use against us in the future. Again, I agree with his speech overall as far as just complete unaccountable money that we're just shoveling out to Ukraine, but let's not pretend Ron Paul's actually for spending money domestically at home to actually help people. So